I'm Bill Vendley. I serve as the Secretary General of Religions for Peace International. I have the joy and pleasure of being the moderator. As Owsley shared, we need to keep our time because we're going to have two extraordinary participants joining us through Skype. And they have very particular schedules that they've been able to work out with us. So Owsley, I'm asking you to help me so that we work as a team so that we can moderate this in the way that helps us all arrive home. We've already seen two of the panelists, both now honorees, wonderful honorees, and I thank the Festival of Faith for recognizing the extraordinary caliber of these two. Cardinal John Onaiyekan is a co-moderator of Religions for Peace, the organization I serve. He's one of my bosses, if I may put it that way. He and 60 other outstanding religious leaders, elected by some 800 religious leaders coming from all around the world. And Father Michael is exemplary. It would make us all be happy if you knew the depths of his service in El Salvador, in Africa, on so many other fronts, and currently serving Cardinal Turkson as the president for the Vatican's Pontifical Council of Justice and Peace. Let me share that we have two other panelists and introduce them for us briefly. One is the Rabbi Rick Jacobs. Rabbi Rick Jacobs is the president of the Union for Reform Judaism. It's the congregational arm of the Reform Jewish movement in North America. He is a remarkable leader of the Reform Jewish movement. He's a man of extraordinary gifts and passion, and so we're honored to have him on our panel today. Let me also mention someone who's linked in a most extraordinary way. This is Professor Dr. Jeffrey Sachs. Jeffrey is the director of the Earth Institute at Columbia University, and he is a special advisor to the UN Secretary General. Perhaps if there's anybody who has multi-dimensional understandings of climate change, the threat that poses, and their relationships with sustainable development, it is our dear friend and colleague, Jeffrey Sachs. So he is also joining us on this panel. We're going to be looking at climate change and at the relationship to sustainable development. The two are intimately related. We can't address one without the other. We're going to turn directly to Dr. Jeffrey Sachs and invite Jeffrey, if we are teed up right, are we? Yes? So Dr. Sachs, Jeffrey, let me mention that through a wonderful access that comes through Louisville here, Dr. Sachs is a trustee of Religions for Peace, along with Christy Brown, and that Religions for Peace and the Earth Institute have hired together a common staff person who happens to be with us as well, Dr. Tony Annette. So Jeffrey, welcome to you, dear man. I know that you've just come back from over the seas. We welcome you and invite you to set the stage for us, please, as we commit ourselves to tackling these two critical issues for our human family.
Bill, thank you very, very much. And ladies and gentlemen, what an honor it is to be together with you. I'm overjoyed. The only thing that would make me happier is if I could be with you in beautiful Louisville in person today. But my schedule made it absolutely impossible, in fact, and I feel like I've just been able to sit down for our moments together before I head for the airport again. I was blessed to be at the Vatican yesterday, home today, and off with Secretary General Ban Ki-moon to Asia tomorrow morning. And I would say that this rather frenetic activity, not just of myself, but of so many there. And let me also congratulate Cardinal John and Father Michael for their unbelievable contributions in this. This activity, in part, results from the fact that we are at an absolutely decisive moment globally when the profound challenges that we face and the crisis of climate change intersecting with crises of inequality, exclusion, and so many other problems are in a way coming to the global diplomatic forefront just at this moment. 2015 is going to be a decisive year, actually, for humanity. I don't guarantee we get this right, but I think we have some important momentum, and we certainly have some unparalleled world leadership right now that can help us. The reason why 2015 is so essential is, in fact, that we've lost a lot of time up until this year in not attending to crucial challenges, whether they are crucial challenges of climate change or poverty or rising inequalities in world society. The climate change challenge was first identified and indeed became the center of a global treaty 23 years ago in Rio de Janeiro at the Earth Summit, that you'll recall. But 23 years later, we still have not found an effective global cooperative approach to head off this profound and growing danger. And on so many issues, we've been adrift. I think that the explanation of this drift in the face of what are clearly rising threats for humanity, even existential threats, has been best expressed by Pope Francis, who in his wonderful exhortation to the world, Evangelii Gaudium, used an expression which resonates so profoundly that it captures our deepest challenge. And that is that Pope Francis said we are suffering from a globalization of indifference. And what he meant by that is the paradox of a world that we're in that is so amazing that we can join each other by Skype effortlessly, I would say, although I thank the technicians for making all the efforts. We can be in all parts of the world in a matter of 3 or 4 days. We can have technologies that can solve problems of hunger or disease. We have wealth that is unimagined in the past, a world economy in which, on average, each person produces $13,000 of value per year, a $100 trillion world economy. And yet, with all of that, we have not been able to focus our efforts and attentions on absolutely vital issues for our survival. And that is the kind of crisis that we face, not economic crisis, really, not a technological crisis, really, because we have solutions. Not a financial crisis, though we've just been through one, but we are able to surmount it. But at the core, a moral crisis. A moral crisis in that in a world of such remarkable plenty, in an age of mind-bogglingly productive technologies, at a time when we could solve great scourges of humanity with hardly an effort, even that small effort has not been made. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to this year. Because 3 years ago, on the 20th anniversary of the Rio Earth Summit, representatives of the 193 member states of the United Nations got together and they took stock. They said 20 years earlier, in 1992, we signed a climate agreement. We signed a biodiversity convention. We signed a convention to combat spreading of deserts, the combating desertification, as it's called. And yet 20 years later, they noted in June 2012 that we have not implemented even one of those three treaties, much less all of them. So they resolved that in order to find a new compass for the world, the member states of the UN should adopt clear goals, now known as Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, that could be guideposts for humanity, a kind of a metric of shared values of what's important in the world. And I think quite wonderfully they define sustainable development in a meaningful way by saying that sustainable development means that societies must move beyond chasing GDP, chasing money, chasing national income, to a holistic framework, one grounded in values, in which economic progress, which we want and which poor countries urgently need, should be combined with social inclusion, in which all parts of society are able to join in which scourges like that of modern slavery, which Pope Francis is repeatedly bringing to our attention and awareness, can be ended, combined with the third pillar of environmental sustainability. It is, in my view, a wonderful offering that governments which often don't agree on much and often don't get it too right in their day-to-day political life put sustainable development as a kind of offering for the world that we should approach the next generation in a holistic manner that combines economic, social, and environmental objectives. They set 2015 as the time to adopt the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, one more thing came along, also a little bit of bad news, and that was back in 2009. We had tried in yet another one of these world meetings to agree on a path for climate change. Remember, that was 17 years after the treaty had first been signed. When the 2009 Copenhagen negotiations failed, the governments also said, my God, this is our last chance. We are failing to keep global warming below that absolutely dangerous red light threshold of 2 degrees Celsius, or for us in America, 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit, that scientists have told us is the no-go zone for life safety on the planet. And we're on a path to exceed that by several degrees if we don't change course. So because that's such a slow and ponderous process, when the 2009 negotiations failed, believe it or not, they set 2015 also as the new rendezvous date, this time in Paris in December. This means there are 2 huge events on the agenda: in September to adopt Sustainable Development Goals, and in December to agree finally on a safe course to stop the human-made global warming. Now, because of these 2 momentous meetings, the UN member states agreed to add yet a third high-level summit, this one to be in Addis Ababa in July 13 to 16, on how to use the financial system worldwide, a financial system that channels roughly $25 trillion of saving each year towards human safety rather than towards human destruction. In other words, how do we make the financial system work for sustainable development, not for unsustainable environmental wreckage and rising inequalities in the world? Well, this, ladies and gentlemen, is our dramatic agenda. July in Addis Ababa, September, and precisely September 25th, at the United Nations to adopt Sustainable Development Goals, and December to find finally a solution for this vexing, urgent, and decisive challenge of human-made global warming. I don't recall another time in my 35 years of work around the world on economic development challenges and economic crises, a diplomatic agenda so full, on the one hand, so filled with complexity, but on the other hand, giving us an opportunity that is unique for our generation to say, we are going to chart a safe course for the planet, and we're going to do it this year by adopting clear goals founded in a shared morality of the common good. Now, normally we might think that this is an agenda beyond us. I would say two things to you. First, it cannot be beyond us because it's vital for our well-being.
Okay. Where could you?
Our children will soon be taking and inheriting from us. But we also are not in normal times. We are in times where we have, thank goodness, great spiritual leaders who can help to guide us. And I must say, we are all blessed in the world to have Pope Francis at this moment with such clarity and bringing joy precisely to a task of such magnitude. And I am so happy to say that two huge events will transpire that will help to guide the way that Pope Francis will lead. When we were at the Vatican on April 28th for a wonderful meeting of UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon together with Pope Francis, followed by a unique gathering of world religious leaders brought together by Religions for Peace, with the Vatican leadership of Cardinal John and Cardinal Turkson and many other of our great moral leaders and inspirations, and the world's top scientists. Not only did we find a consensus, absolutely, that merged reason and faith, science and morality, in a feeling in that room that was unlike any that I have ever felt before, of absolute common united spirit. But we also heard the wonderful news that Pope Francis will be issuing an encyclical, as he put it, God willing, before the end of June. And if anyone knows, he would know. I think we're on a good track. We can expect the encyclical soon. This is phenomenal news. And I think it's only matched by another wonderful fact, which I want to share and end with you, and that is that when the world leaders meet on the morning of September 25th, 9 a.m. at the United Nations, it will be an extraordinary meeting for three reasons. First, my guess is that it will be the largest gathering of world leaders in the world's history. Probably 170 or 180 heads of state and government. Second, it will be the 70th anniversary of the United Nations, which I believe we also must be grateful for because it is our best hope for peace. It is the true crossroads where all nations can speak to each other with civility and with the genius of diplomacy. And third, that meeting will be opened by none other than Pope Francis, who will be speaking to all of the world's political leaders and reminding them of the unprecedented opportunity and moral stakes of our time. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Have a wonderful conference, and thank you for allowing me to be part of it today.
Jeffrey, you've just heard everybody's great appreciation for you. I don't know if Jeff is hearing, but I was going to share with him, he knows, this is a multi-religious event. And so, although Jeff is exquisitely modest about these matters, at least his Jewish parents in Detroit should deserve some credit for this man who is so profoundly passionate. Sorry, Jeff, I couldn't resist. Because Jeff and we're having so much fun working together. But as you know, in the Hebrew Jewish experience, 2 tablets were given. One is the love of neighbor tablet. The other is the love of God. I regard Jeffrey as one of the great masters of the second tablet. So thank you, Jeff. Bless you. So we go now immediately, Father Michael, to you. We invite you, of course you can seat at your chair if you wish, but if you'd like to go to the podium, you're most welcome. We invite you, given the schedules that we have, to take about 10 minutes with us. Jeffrey Sachs has just mentioned the extraordinary time that many of us spent with Cardinal Turkson and also with you in the Vatican on April 28th. So we thank you for that, and we invite you very warmly now to please help us on these difficult issues.
Well, thank you for the award, and thank you for the second welcome back. I cannot do any better in laying out the issues and the timetable of this year of 2015 than Jeffrey has already done. So I won't, in a sense, add to that or subtract from it either. But I'll ask a question which perhaps is running through your minds, and in any case, I think it would be helpful as a contribution to this picture and this agenda that Jeffrey has sketched for us. And the question is, in all that we heard over these past 10 or 15 minutes while he was speaking, I don't think he used the word religion once, did he? I don't think he used the word religion. And I think our question, given the nature of our gathering, is what is the role of religion in 2015? What should we who are religious be thinking? What should we be praying? And what should we be doing? And I'll begin by saying something negative. That is to say that religions are not on the sidelines of this scenario, this drama, looking to replace the actors that Jeffrey already identified. Religion, rightly understood, is not trying to kick somebody else off the agenda or off the stage and say, no, we want to take your place. And I hope that I can make that point very strongly, because one of the ways that people, let's say, defend themselves from the challenge of change is to accuse religion of meddling where it doesn't belong. So I'm trying to affirm very strongly that religion doesn't want to meddle where it doesn't belong. Religion, good religion, right religion, holy religion, is not looking to replace the economists. It's not looking to replace the politicians. It's not looking to replace the scientists. And it's not looking to replace ordinary citizens. None of those should be subtracted from the picture. Religion, good religion, I think, is meant to accompany these processes. And as we go through 2015, what would be sad is if we said, well, here we are on a very important mission. We are living a very important year. We are facing very important decisions. And our religions have taken the year off. Wouldn't that be sad? Wouldn't that be sad if we said, oh no, they're not here. They don't belong here. They're in their holy places. Would that be better? Would we do a better job if the religions withdrew to their holy places and left all this to the UN and the competent scientists and economists? I think some people would like us to do that, wouldn't they? But I don't think that's what we are called to do. And I can say for my own faith that that's not what we intend to do. we intend to accompany. And that accompaniment is substantive. It's not just following along passively, not just traipsing along for the ride. We have something very, very, very important to contribute. Now, I realize, and I'm very happy to be speaking at a multi-religious event. So the next sentence, which, as I did already this morning, I will announce is an important sentence. The next important sentence is non-denominational. It's non-denominational. I will also admit that it's politically incorrect. So don't start hissing when you hear it. I've already apologized. It is not politically correct, but I'm going to say it. This is the sentence, and I think this sentence tells you, if you ask yourself the question, what is religion supposed to do while we're trying to solve these problems? Here it is. Religion's role is to remind us that God is God and man is man, period. Religion, all religions, their role in these important issues is to remind us that God is God and man is man. And if we can believe, understand, and follow through on those two related affirmations, then I think we have a better chance as a human family to meet our sustainable development goals, to meet our climate change goals, and to finally begin treating each other like brothers and sisters. Does that sound like a good idea? Good. What's the problem? Well, the problem is that we mix the sentence up. Yeah, we don't, even though it's a fairly simple sentence, we get it wrong. And so we end up putting man is God and God is nothing, right? That's the meaning of the sorts of behavior that we're behaving, and even the meaning of the decisions that we're taking. We're taking decisions as if there was no God and as if man were the God. So that's it, with the second one with a small g, the first with a big. So there is no God with a big G, man is God with a small g. That's the way we behave, and that is what the Greeks called hubris and what we Judeo-Christians call sin. That is sin. It's against the commandments to think that there is no God and that man is God. That's against the commandments, and it's sinful. And we've been doing it since the beginning, and we persist in doing it, and that's why Pope Francis insists on God's mercy, because we need to constantly be forgiven for our idolatry and our sinful pride. So the moral foundation that Jeffrey Sachs talks about, in my opinion, and I speak as a religious person, and I think I speak in the name of all religious people, that foundation is possible, that moral foundation is possible if we acknowledge in truth, in reality and in truth, that God is God and man is just man. Let me spell that out now in terms of the specific goal of sustainable development, which I believe includes a sustainable planet. So I won't keep repeating climate. When I say sustainable development, I mean sustainable people and sustainable climate. What do we mean by sustainable development? And here I think that language like that Jeffrey uses and the other experts is a little bit unhelpful for ordinary people like us. Because the word development sounds like an important and difficult thing, and we tend to withdraw and think, well, the experts must know what development is, and hopefully there's going to be some if they get the money they need and if their plans are carried out well. So I'd like to redefine sustainable development and say the word development isn't really the key word, although it's very important. The key is that we should have and be sustainable people. This whole business of the goals is about people. It's not about an abstraction. It's not about a process or a product or a mechanism or an industry. It's about people. And when we look at the world, when we listen to the bad news, of which there's plenty, what are we hearing? We're hearing example after example where human life is unsustainable, unbearable, unlivable. That's the real problem. It's not that the statistics are all skewed or exaggerated. It's that people, men, women, and children like us, are unable to live as any decent human being would wish them to live. That's the problem. So in our sense of the goals, and now I'm speaking again as a religious person, so the religious contribution is to shift the focus so that ordinary good people like ourselves know that what this is about is people. And the statistics and the indices and the procedures and the treaties, they'll take care of themselves, but let's keep our focus on the people. These are sustainable people. And the way the world is organized or disorganized right now, there's about 1 billion of us who live nicely, and that includes, as far as I know, everybody in this room. There's about 3 billion that live on the edge. You might call it the global middle class, but it doesn't mean what middle class means here in America. It means the middle, and that life is pretty difficult. It's precarious. They're the people who live on the edge, and when something goes wrong, it goes very wrong because they don't have much extra to go with. And there's 3 billion who are out. Simply out. They don't count. They don't have. There's nothing significant for them to do. They cannot consume. They cannot produce. They are excluded. That's a rough picture of the world. And so we are not talking about development, an abstraction that's supposed to make this picture nicer. We're talking about more than 3 billion, maybe half of the planet's inhabitants, maybe more than half, maybe up to 6 billion people whose lives have to become more livable. That's what we're talking about. 6 billion people whose lives have to become more livable. And if that means, and since, I should say since, because I'm a realist, since that means that we cannot go on living as we are if they're going to have livable lives, then you can draw the consequence or the conclusion for yourselves. And that's the turning point or the breaking point that we're at. It's not statistics, it's not graphs. It's us and our way of life. It's them and their way of life. And what we say, if we want sustainable development goals, is that we want sustainable people, sustainable brothers and sisters. Secondly, I said sustainable people, development for sustainable people, but really it's not about development, again, in an abstract. It's to say that all 7 billion of us want to become developees. Yeah, we all want to be recipients of development. We want to be involved in and benefiting from development. And that's the capability approach of Amartya Sen. And that is, I think, at the core of what Jeffrey Sachs is pushing for, and I hope it's at the core of what the UN is going to do. That what we mean by development is the development of people's capacities, of people's abilities, of people's freedom and fulfillment. So, as a religious person, I say, let's have sustainable brothers and sisters. With Amartya Sen, I say, let's have sustainable developees, people who are really recipients of a deeper development than just a bit more to eat or a bit more change in one's pocket. And the third thing, and the third and most radical, and this comes from Pope Francis, he says, no, I'm not interested in development. I'm not even interested in developees. I'm interested in that everyone should become a developer. And that's what I tried to say this morning. Everybody is a developer. Everybody is a subject, a protagonist of development. And he is convinced, and he has said it very eloquently, if the bottom 3 billion are not active protagonists, subjects, and participants in development, there is no hope for any of us. And my dear brothers and sisters, if we are going to help our world to change so that all 7 billion of us can be developees and developers, there is a lot to do. And thank God that you're here to pledge your effort and everyone's effort that you can convince on the great task that lies ahead of us. So thank you.
Father Michael, thank you. And a way of re-saying for all of us that goes directly to who we are, each of us as a person. So we thank you. Colleagues, we have now the chance to welcome Rabbi Rick Jacobs, again via Skype. Rick, as I have already introduced, is the president of the Union of American Reform Congregations. Rick, are you there? Are you with us?
I'm very much with you.
Oh, welcome, Rick. Oh, there you are. Fantastic. So, Rick, the floor is yours. We're so delighted that you could be with us in this way.
Thank you, Dr. Vendley, and thank you to this extraordinary panel and to this great gathering. I feel very honored to be with all of you, and were it not for the impending Sabbath, I would be with you in person. And that is exactly the framework that I would like to share with you about how the Jewish tradition in particular, but really all faith traditions, figure very, very prominently into the ritual and textual and social justice work that we do. I want to begin by, first of all, acknowledging Pope Francis as an inspiration to me, to, I know, the entire Jewish people, and really to the entire world. And so what a privilege to follow Father Michael and to look to the Pope's leadership on so many things. And I would just say that the connection between poverty and climate change and religious faith, those are intertwined in the most profound ways, but very often, as Father Michael said, we separate those. And I would like to share an integrated worldview that comes to us in the form of the Jewish tradition. So in a few hours here in New York, we will begin the weekly Sabbath, the seventh day, a day to literally cease from not just work and not from just the busyness of life, but to cease from our manipulation of creation. Right, all day long, all week long, we each do many things, hopefully many purposeful things, but we really look at the world around us as things for us to shape and to reshape. On the Sabbath, the Bible, the 5 books of Moses in particular say, on the seventh day, you can rest, God rested, and the world needs to rest. To take time away from manipulating and using the earth and creation, to step back and to appreciate not only the gift of creation, but frankly the responsibility that we have for creation. So the seventh day is a Sabbath, but we learn in the reading for the Jewish people this weekend that not only does each week have a Sabbath, years have a Sabbath as well. And the seventh year is called the Shemitah year, and it is a year, an entire year for us to stop sowing the field and harvesting our crops, and to give the earth a chance to replenish and to regenerate, and for us to have a year of study, reflection, and to see ourselves not simply as partaking in creation, but preserving and caring for creation. I share those opening thoughts about the Sabbath of days and the Sabbath of years as wonderful counterbalances, as wonderful ritual reminders that, as Father Michael said, we are not God. The book of Leviticus says to us, Ki li haaretz, for the earth is mine, says God, and we are but sojourners and caretakers of that earth. And I think for us to think about our responsibility for climate change as people of faith, too often we delegate that responsibility to the scientists, to the economists, to the politicians. What we must, as people of faith, do is to own this as our personal responsibility, as the responsibility of our faith communities. And I think that so often we in the religious community, we sometimes sequester ourselves from all the other truth traditions, all the other critical pieces of this integrated solution that we need, that Dr. Sachs laid out so eloquently and has done so literally throughout his career. And I know that we pay attention to the strengthening of our congregations and to the quality of our prayer life and the way in which we care for those in our family and our immediate community. But it is clearly a religious responsibility to be better stewards of this creation that God has not placed into our hands, but allowed us to participate in. And I'd say that I can't imagine God feeling particularly good about our stewardship of this earth and the way in which we make decisions as societies, as governments, that literally endanger future generations. So this is an act of discipline. This is an act of really separating ourselves from what we want and what is comfortable and, frankly, what is convenient, to do that which is responsible not only for us, but for the generations that we pray will come after us. I want to highlight the degree to which climate change and poverty interconnect. One of the things that we know, and I give a very graphic example, we know that in catastrophes, not all people suffer equally. So just think, for example, of the sinking of the Titanic. People who were in the upper decks, people who were in the first-class cabin had a much greater chance of survival, and they did. But those in the cheaper decks, those who were unable to pay those higher fees for the travel, they suffered and died in much greater numbers. To be honest, we are together on this planet Earth, and yet already the effects of climate change are not equally distributed. And it's not equally distributed throughout the world. This is a global problem, but some of our Western and some of our, quote, most developed countries are actually causing a much greater crisis than others. And those paying the price of our actions are often those in the poorest communities and those with the least resources. So to think of social justice and to think of income inequality and to think of climate change in the same thought, in the same prayer, is to understand some of the critical dimensions to this crisis that we face. And I think if those of us say, well, the scientists and the politicians, they'll try to work this out, we will not succeed. Our faith communities gather daily, certainly for weekly worship, and we have the ability to put as a primary religious task our living within our spiritual and religious means, helping our world to make the responsible choices, holding our politicians accountable, and learning from the scientists who tell us beyond any shadow of a doubt that climate change is real. We still live in a world where those who claim in the name of either religion or some other truth tradition that we can pray our way out of this mess. That is to say, we misunderstand religion and we misunderstand the responsibility that God calls us to. So again, as powerful as prayer is, and I will spend much of this Sabbath in prayer and study with my community, I would say that this is a case where we must act. And prayer can awaken us to these kinds of crucial issues, but it is not a substitute for action. So for congregations to make decisions about how they build our buildings, how we function within our communities, And in our Jewish tradition, we're told that a faith community should be built on the highest place in the community. The highest point is where you build your church, your mosque, your synagogue, your temple. And the point is that we must be an exemplar of a faithful and responsible, sustainable life. And I think we must put as a priority, whether it's a preacher thinking about what will I give a sermon about? Can I give a sermon about climate change? People are coming hoping for a textual analysis to talk about something of individual significance. And we must put climate change into the very fabric. The book of Genesis doesn't begin with the revelation on Mount Sinai. It doesn't begin with laws about how we treat one another. It begins in a universal place about the earth being created, the world coming to be, and God's place not only in that creation, but in sustaining that world. So for our faith traditions, in the Judeo-Christian tradition, there's simply no doubt that creation is what surrounds us and what we participate in. We don't call it nature, because it is of God, it is from God. And that godly dimension to each of us, that holy spark within each of us, is the part that must be responsible for the whole. That we're responsible, I'm not just responsible for the Reformed Jewish community, or even just the Jewish community. And I know Father Michael and Cardinal John and Dr. Sachs and Dr. Vendley, we're not responsible only for our narrow circle of family or faith. We're responsible for all of God's children. And we're responsible for all of God's creation, for the mountains, for the animals, for the seas. And when we have that global consciousness, when we have that sense of ultimate responsibility, we're going to be in a place where we can actually redirect the trajectory of the world as we know it. And it's an awesome task. It's an overwhelming responsibility, but it starts with practices that remind us of our place, our modest, humble place in the world, as well as the power of our actions to do good, to bring blessing, or to do evil and to bring curse. It is literally in our hands as people of faith and as faith communities. I love that this gathering in the Festival of Faith is a multi-faith gathering. There's simply no way that the Christian world or the Muslim world or the Buddhist world or the Hindu world or the native religions or the Jewish world is going to individually make the decisive difference. This is exactly an issue where every faith community, and even those without a faith, together we are going to have to act in glorious harmony if we are going to reshape this world. And I can just imagine that the Holy One is praying for us, that we would awaken to stop debating whether there is in fact climate change taking place, whether in fact it is reversible, and to begin to act as the responsible religious people that God created us to be. And to worry only about ourselves is not a religious path, and to worry only about our own religious community is not the work we are called to. We are called to a moment of commitment and of consciousness. And I would pray that this be a Sabbath. I don't know where everyone will be for the Sabbath. For the Muslim community, today is in fact the Sabbath. For the Jewish community, it will be tomorrow. It will be on Sunday for the Christian world. Whenever it is that we observe a Sabbath, can we use that time to not only appreciate our many blessings, but to stand from the world in our role as manipulators and partakers, and think of ourselves as protectors and of stewards. In so doing, a practice of ritual is actually an awakening to action. And can we use our religious voices not only to shout prayers of faith and of petition and of blessing, but also to call out to our leaders, to call out to our politicians, and to say, not in our name, to say, we need you to be our partners as we are partners with God in shaping the world that God intended for us. I have great hope and great optimism. I feel the sense of partnership with the faith communities gathered in the festivals of faith, but also those partners that work in Religions for Peace. I am honored and proud to be a part of that work. This is going to take a multi-faith and an international effort. I look forward to being a part of the gathering in September here in New York at the United Nations, and to make sure that our faith community is both active and participating and doing our part to spread the word and to call everyone into a concerted and beautiful, harmonious action together as we preserve and protect not only the earth for us, but for future generations who deserve all that we can. And lastly, that we accept a special responsibility for the poorest among us, and to know that the impact and the danger that we all face are especially faced by those most vulnerable today and tomorrow. That is the call of faith. And I know for our Reformed Jewish community, the two faith commitments for us for this entire year and for the years to come, we've identified climate change as our number one social justice priority, and income inequality, to address those two not only separately but together. That is a faith agenda for today, for tomorrow, for this year, and for the years to come. And I hope with all of us gathered today, and many of those who are listening and participating via the live stream, that we'll hear this call to consciousness, this call to awareness, and this call to action. And in so doing, we will be the responsible stewards that God placed upon the earth. It's an honor to be with you, and I look forward to the conversation ahead.
Rabbi Rick Jacobs, maybe on behalf of all here, Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you. Thank you.
God bless you, and thank you so much for your extraordinary words and being in utter solidarity and unity as we are all working together on this topic. I'm going to turn quickly to you, Your Eminence, Cardinal John Onaiyekan, 10 minutes, and then we're going to go directly to open discussion among all here. So, Your Eminence, please, we welcome you so much for your remarks.
Thank you very much, Bill. I left Nigeria with a letter informing me that I will participate in these gatherings on two counts. First, what I did in the morning, my life journey, and then that we're going to have a panel at which we shall discuss extreme religious violence. And then I got in here, and I'm told it's going to be about climate change. So don't be surprised if I just speak at random. But since it seems I'm the only one who represents the 6, is it how many billion do you say we are at the bottom?
1 billion.
3 billion. Anyway, since I'm about the only one, and if I'm not the only one, I'm certainly the lucky one representing the poor end of the world. Those on the receiving end of everything, I obviously cannot but say something from the bottom of my heart. First of all, is that first, we have been feeling the impact of climate change, but we thought it was all divine action. It is not anybody's fault. We're getting plenty of rain today and plenty of drought tomorrow. The desert is eating up everywhere, and people are saying the gods are angry with us. And a lot of prayer. The rabbi has told us, we tell people to pray that the rain will come, or pray that the rain will stop, or pray that the atmosphere will be more conducive for us to be able to survive. Now we have been told, thanks be to God, that the scientists have studied this matter and they have agreed that indeed the gods are not to blame. Now I go back home and I tell my people, listen, my brothers and sisters, the gods are not to blame. This is human activity. And the people doing it are far away. You can't reach them. Therefore, we must shout and say enough. And that's what I'm doing here. shouting and saying enough that climate change is real. It is a result of human responsibility, scientifically proven, not by my own scientists, because we don't have them. And that the impact is hitting the innocent most of all. The rabbi also mentioned that. But ultimately, it is hitting everybody, which means it's only the fool who will not take this matter seriously. Let me give you examples in my own concrete experience, not the high-level discussions of the scientists that we have been hearing now. Take example of desertification. The Sahara Desert is eating up much of West Africa. By eating up, I mean the areas where we had grasslands and people were farmers have been pushed down by more than 400, 500 kilometers, which means many villages that used to live on agriculture can no longer survive. The result is many young people evacuate those parts of the country. I'm talking of Nigeria only, but you can repeat the same phenomenon in other parts of West Africa. They can no longer survive farming, not because they are lazy, but because the ground does not give anything anymore. No water. There's only 1 week or 2 weeks of rain in the year. And so the cities, the few cities we have in Africa, are congested with miserable, poor people looking for anything to survive. So this inland migration is also the source from which the other migrations takes off. All those young people who are finding their way through the desert to the Mediterranean coast and risking their life in dinghy boats trying to get to a paradise called Europe. You are lucky here in America that the Atlantic Ocean is too big. You would have found them here already. Already you have them in various ways. A movement that not even the most strict visa regulations can stop. If you ask me, I will say, as far as this movement is concerned, you ain't seen nothing yet. More will come. This is a typical example. There's also another example about how climate change is hitting us. The same zones used to be also fertile areas for animal breeding. Well, those people who were looking after animals, the pastors, they can no longer sustain their animals, their cattle in these places. They move south. And as they're moving southwards, they clash with the farmers. The cattle roam into the farm of the farmers and eat up their crops. And the farmers get angry, obviously. And they get angry and kill the cattle. And war begins between one tribe of cattle breeders and another tribe of farmers. And when these tribes also happen to coincide with Christians and Muslims, people begin to talk of a religious war between Christians and Muslims. Whereas I always say, this is just the same old war between Cain and Abel. Sustainable development. In my country, we want to be developed. We claim to be a developing country. We want to join the middle class of the BRICS. What do they call them? The middle class, Brazil, Russia, India, South Africa. We said Nigeria ought to be there. And we are so anxious about our GDP. And in fact, early this year, it was announced by our government that actually, according to our GDP, we are now the biggest economy in Africa. The ordinary Nigerian heard this story and said, what exactly does this mean? We are the biggest economy in Africa, but the country is full of poor people. Well, but that seems to be part of the irony of a situation of a nation that is very rich, but full of poor people. What is the source of our wealth? Is the oil economy. But it is a wealth that is at great, great cost, because the system of exploitation of oil in my country is very different from how you do things here in the Gulf of Mexico or even in the North Sea. The BP and other such oil companies don't have to bother themselves about carefully exploiting the oil, because our rulers, who are supposed to make sure that they protect our interests, seem to have other interests, and anything goes. The result is massive, massive environmental degradation. Some of you are probably aware of the story of the Niger Delta. But even take the matter a bit forward. We also, all of us poor country, we want to be rich too. We don't want to remain poor so that the world may not spoil, because we know we are not the ones spoiling the world. We too want to be industrialized. And efforts are being made to set up factories here and there, and nobody is talking about carbon emissions. Because how are we ever going to get up? If we are we going to wait till people out here give us a way of industrialization does not involve carbon emissions? There is therefore a kind of global responsibility. I was at the meeting in Rome, and the president of Ecuador gave a very fantastic speech about how the whole of the humanity must be responsible for making sure that our environment is preserved. And if you don't want the countries with forests to deforest, to cut down their trees and get some money from plants, from wood, then you must pay them for not cutting down their trees. But who will pay the bill? I was listening to him with extreme care, and I'm hoping that this discussion is going to also feature further. Talking of global responsibility, I just believe, and here in a much more practical and positive note, since the creation of the human family with Adam and Eve, whether there was Adam and Eve or not, that's not a question here. We're just talking figuratively. Since the original creation of Adam and Eve, never before has the world reached a stage now where it is practically possible to build one human family. We can do it now. The whole of humanity can be one human family. We have the resources, we have the communications, the technology, and we are already living it in many directions, in many dimensions. I've finished. Now, therefore, for me, I told you people this morning, I am 71 years old. I'm looking forward to see this human family really established so that I can I can really feel that I am among brothers and sisters wherever I go. And people will no longer be rejected because they come from the wrong place, they were born in the wrong times. Is it possible? I believe it is. And if you don't go through that, I don't see how we're ever going to solve the problem of climate change. Finally, since 2 minutes, I have one more. I just want to refer to one issue raised by the rabbi, that we shouldn't leave these matters to scientists, business people, or politicians alone, and that religious people should get meaningfully involved. I'm hoping that those various stakeholders that are mentioned will somehow find a forum to sit down around the same table, because it is a multi-stakeholder affair. And it isn't as if one group does its own, another one does its own, and we religious people sit in our churches and pray. No, we must sit down around the table and come out with a common solution to the problem. I hope I have interpreted well the mind of all those whom I represent here, those who are on the receiving end at the bottom of the globe. God bless you all.
Your Eminence, Cardinal John Onaiyekan, thank you very much. Thank you very much. We now have a chance. There are roving mics, and let's use, Father Michael, your terminology. We're all developees, and let's recognize that and turn to one another and to open this conversation. Let me just clarify. Rabbi Rick is probably beginning to celebrate Shabbat. So are you still with us, Rabbi Rick?
Yes.
You are. Okay. So and I think I'm almost sure that Dr. Jeffrey Sachs couldn't stay with us. Jeff, you're not there. Just to know who's on for question and answer. Okay. So kindly let's work as a big team here. All of us stakeholders. There's the first question being offered. Yeah. There you go, Father, please.
First, can I remind the rabbi, you don't have to go back to the Titanic. You can go to California now and see that the rich are keeping their pools open where there is such devastation going on because of the lack of rain. So that right in our California right now, that difference between the economic inequality is evident right now. My question is, and Dr. Sachs isn't here, but one of the things that's going to happen when Francis comes to this country is he's going to address Congress. So any treaty that could be passed by, let's imagine all three of those meetings result in something really great. It has to come to the U.S. Senate where the rubber meets the road. And Francis is going to be talking there. How are we going to make sure, as American citizens, that someone like Senator Rand Paul from Kentucky and others from wherever we come are then going to make that happen? Because they can have pieces of paper all they want. It can't happen. We can't pass the law of the sea treaty yet in this country. So how maybe every congregation, mosque or temple should say, are you registered to vote and did you call? Because the NRA does that. Are we going to say, are you registered to vote if you register in this church, and will you make a call about this treaty?
Rabbi Rick, you are an American citizen. There was some reference to American political system. Not to put you on the spot, but I invite you to reflect on this matter if you wish.
Well, I agree very much that the questioner suggested that there's going to be no shortage of inspired words spoken, both at the United Nations, at the U.S. Congress, and yet where the rubber meets the road is for our elected officials to make decisions that reflect the will of the voters. And that, as you said, Jess, you can't be in this if you're not registered to vote. And to make sure that we raise our voices, by the way, in our current discourse in Congress and around our country, we don't raise our voices in the most compelling and civil ways. And I would ask us, in the name of our faith, to raise our voices strongly, lovingly, humbly, but consistently and with clarity, because we must hold our elected officials accountable. They are not independent. They represent us. And I think that there are many of us who raise questions right now about our political system, really being able to move out of gridlock and to face the biggest questions not only our country is facing, but our world is facing. And so I think that each and every one of us has both the responsibility and the opportunity to lead this discussion from wonderful, inspired, faithful words to definitive and smart and audacious actions that will preserve our planet.
Thank you, Rabbi Rick. Yeah. Either of the two other panelists? Then we turn to an open question. Yes, please. Yeah.
I think a lot of us feel pretty strongly that the way we live is, if not killing us, exhausting us. The first world way of living that is supposedly so rich and wonderful. And yet, when we hear the challenges before us, it's also very daunting and more than a little exhausting. So I wonder if you could speak to two things. One would be where you're seeing communities getting it right, where signs of hope are in the world for this, to help us imagine that it is possible to live a better way, and where in your religious traditions you find resources for teaching us how to live a richer life that does not depend on this way of life. I hope that makes sense.
It does. Two very, very large questions. Let me ask any of the panelists who would like to respond to signal their interest in responding.
Just to tell my sister over there, I'm like you. I'm always looking for a positive way out. There's always a positive way out of every situation. And I can say that right now, I thank God that we are even talking this way, that we're even discussing these matters, and that we are beginning to be aware. That already is progress, isn't it? From point of view of religious leaders, I've already made up my mind that I'm going to do all I can when I get home to get all my fellow brother bishops to be equally passionate about this matter as I am. Sometimes they say they respect me and that I have a mighty clout in their midst. I will now test my clout with them. Because we are lucky. We Catholics, Catholic religious leaders, Catholic bishops. We are lucky because we will be following the leadership of Peter, whom we all even vow when we ordained bishops to always obey. So when the encyclical is out, it will be our duty to preach it, not for as opinion, but as the word of God for the men of our days. I'm sure the bishops of the United States of America have the same responsibility as I have. And I imagine their own challenge is different from my own. I will pray for them, and I hope they pray for me too.
Thank you. Father Michael, would you like to respond? And Rick, you...
I'll give an example that gives me great hope. At the end of October, Pope Francis encouraged our department, our Pontifical Council, to invite popular organizations. Those are organizations of people who are excluded, who come together to face the challenges that they face with their own initiative and with their own resources. And one segment of this 150-person gathering that struck me very much were the people who, and this is what they call themselves, the waste pickers or the garbage recyclers of the world. And they are doing marvelous work. There are cities which save millions of dollars a year in terms of costs of dealing with garbage, because the garbage pickers go through the stuff first, separate what needs to be recycled and sell it, and then what remains is also disposed of properly. And there are people who've been doing this all their lives. I was very touched by a woman who said that she first began picking with her grandfather, and he would pick the things, and she would look for bits of toys that she could have and use. And so she's been picking since she was 5 or 6 years old, and she's proud of it. And I think when Pope Francis says there is no solution if they are not part of the solution, that for me is a good example. And when I see the waste that surrounds us in sophisticated cities like this one or ancient cities like Rome, I am very sad that we don't have waste pickers who can make a living and who can contribute with pride and dignity to the welfare of all society. So I think there is hope, but as I said before, the developees have to be in the driver's seat, and they've got to feel that they are respected and that their dignity is recognized.
Thank you. Rabbi Rick, would you like to comment on this?
Yeah, I would comment that certainly for those of us here in the United States, I think many people are of the mind that somehow happiness is going to come by having more things. Material things bring happiness. What actually, not just our faith tradition, but frankly, modern psychologists tell us that's actually not what they discover. And I think to help people learn that just because I can doesn't mean I should, and just because it's allowed doesn't mean it's right. And I think for us to find not only sustainable ways of living, but ways that actually fulfill us and give our life purpose and hope, that seems to be what the biggest hunger is in the world. And I think our faith traditions model how we can do that. And I think that's not become the dominant ethos of our world. And again, it doesn't mean that we, live only a life of need. And I pray that Cardinal John, who speaks so eloquently about those who, for many people, are not even seen or even considered. But if we could share the resources of our world more equitably, and if we could, especially in the countries like the United States, police ourselves and to make responsible decisions, and know that the real core of our lives is not about having, not about seeking to acquire, but to live in harmony with. I just think we actually have many of the answers. We have the faith that teaches us that discipline, and it's what people are most yearning for. So I think it could potentially be the win-win-win that our world needs.
Thank you. Carol, if I can just very quickly to your same question, we in Religions for Peace think that this is the moment for all of the religious traditions to have these simple pedagogical tools that help their respective believers connect the challenge of climate change and sustainable development to religious obligation. So if Pope Francis will do that, so too can every other tradition. And we need to bring these materials available so they're in one source and there can be many, many attempts to do this kind of work. So that's one that we are going to try to make our own contribution to doing. The second is that we think about is that our own religious houses need to become green. So what does it look like in the north in an urban environment to have a green house of worship? And what does it look like in the south, in a developing state, in a rural area, to have a green mosque? And how do women in that mosque have micro-enterprise by catching sun and selling energy for cell phones and things like that? There's a whole technology that's available. Dr. Jeffrey Sachs, who isn't with us, has a whole team of engineers that we're exploring. Let's not simply talk. We need to walk the walk as the religious houses in all the various situations or circumstances that we find ourselves. So in both fronts, Carol, these are just notes of how we think we need to start going forward in part. Please, next question.
There are some potential allies of great power, and those are the graduates of the colleges, across the colleges and universities across this country, who are at a point that they're looking for involvements that capture their hearts. We would like to engage them. I know that I will be joining one in a week, and I know I'll receive these questions. So I'll ask any of the respondents, what can we say to specifically the young people graduating from college that will capture their commitment and allow them to engage in this great movement?
Thank you. Thank you. Wonderful question. Any of the panelists, please, open to responding. Rabbi Rick Jacobs, please.
First of all, I love the question. One of the things that we in religious leadership have been debating endlessly is the whole question of where are the millennials? Where are those young people in their teens, 20s, and early 30s? And even this week's Pew report has shown us that the growing number of millennials who choose to be completely apart from religious communities and religious tradition is a growing circle. And my theory, again, shared by many, is that part of that is that we in the religious community have been, in some ways, irrelevant to their lives. That we've shown ourselves to be, first of all, always arguing with each other, the different faith communities, about, who is the true, the faith. And we have also been very inwardly focused in our communities. I think with climate change, especially with college students who will be coming home or finishing their college careers, for us as a religious community to be able to say we actually stand for something. We are out there trying to shape not just our houses of worship, which we do a lot of wonderful work on. We're trying to shape the house that God created, the world. I think we would be so attractive to those young people who are very suspicious about what it would mean to really commit themselves deeply to a faith tradition and a faith community. Let's be the most dynamic, the most forward-thinking, the most embracing, and frankly, the most relevant of faith communities. That's, by the way, just to sort of sing the song of Pope Francis, that's why throughout the world there's such excitement about his leadership among the young, because he's speaking a language that relates to the very lives and concerns of all people, but especially young people. So I think we have a tremendous opportunity to not just speak to them, but to bring them into this coalition of the willing to reshape ourselves, our individual selves, our communities, our countries, and our world.
Thank you. Any further comment, or please?
No, I would just add that it's very important to ask them. In other words, it's one of the feelings that I think they have is that what they think or plan or hope for is not very important, because the current establishment is very closed and inward-looking and hanging on. So I think a first step of sincerely asking young people what they would like to do to make a difference, or what could they imagine people like ourselves doing to help them get started, I think it would be great to hear what they have to say.
Very good. Cardinal John?
Well, I'm afraid I have to confess that the greatest commonality that I find among our young people of the range mentioned, namely early 20s to early 50s, is precisely the great issue of being unemployed or underemployed or badly employed. And so when you start raising, I can foresee that if you raise issues of climate change without linking it up with their highly felt need of getting something to make them life meaningful, we will not, I don't think we'll attract them. And so maybe if we are able to devise programs where issues of climate change also become possibilities of engagement and employment for the youth, they will gladly jump onto it. But it requires quite a bit of a careful study. But I will keep it in mind.
Thank you. Good. Another question here, please.
I'd like to begin by thanking you guys for taking time out of your afternoon to share your knowledge with us. And I would like to pose a question that we haven't really touched on. So the main vehicle of religion deals with belief and getting people to believe. Clearly with climate change, it's a big problem that a lot of people, no matter how much science you show them, they don't believe in climate change. What role do you think that religion should play in having people believe that climate change is actually a problem?
It's a very good question, very, very helpful question. All are open to, Father Michael, some of your comments went in that direction?
Somebody wants to answer them.
Some?
He wants to answer.
Oh. Okay, that'll be a next question. So let's go ahead and...
No, but he asked, is there a way we religious leaders can get people who don't believe in climate change to believe in it, because it is our specialty, making people to believe things? I would say, I'm sorry, I regret, because it's not my job to make people believe what is unbelievable. Once somebody doesn't want to believe anything, even the Pope can't make you believe it. There has to be some reasonableness behind what you believe. And I think what we could do is perhaps dispose the mind of those who want to reject science. That, listen, you're just rejecting science, but the fact is that this is the truth. And they will then, you don't even believe science, you accept it. If it is scientific, it is not a matter for belief. I don't believe that Bill is here with me. I know he's here.
Yeah.
I would say that to run the risk of seeming to contradict His Eminence.
Go ahead.
I feel that what you're asking about is the fear that's blocking the insight or the acceptance. It's fear that, and our business in religion is to show people or indicate the way, orient people towards the sources which will address their fear. That fear is the opposite of faith. Fear is the opposite of belief. And so the fact that somebody disbelieves is just the outward expression of what is a fear. And I can see why people are afraid. I think it's a frightening topic. And especially, and I keep repeating what I've learned since I've come here to Kentucky. I mean, if your life is all tied up in a coal mining village in eastern Appalachia, I can see why you would be very afraid. And so I think we have to take up the burden of people's legitimate fears, and we have to learn, maybe through humility and sympathy, to address those who have more or less baseless fears. But I think fear is the obstacle to facing the challenge.
Very good. There was a question here.
The rabbi wants to talk.
Oh, Rabbi Rick Jacobs, please.
Thank you. First of all, I think that we in the faith community can have the most powerful effect because we are the inheritors, certainly of medieval disputations between science, between philosophy and religion, between faith and reason. So I think that we have oftentimes been seen as the opponents of science. The science is a truth tradition that somehow threatens the religious world. I think we as faith leaders, when we can affirm that science is one of the great truth traditions in our world, and that conclusions of science are not at odds with religion. I know that may be controversial for some in our faith, but even as we think of biblical texts that talk about, the universe being created in 6 days, and people saying, well, scientifically, that's not possible. I think that, for me, science may tell us how, may tell us what. Religion has been best off trying to say why and for what purpose, not to explain, but to give the underlying purpose and meaning. So I think that when we as religious leaders can affirm the scientific conclusions of climate change, I think some of those doubters who refuse to accept the validity of science or just think that, they can simply ignore it, I think will be maybe not convinced, but they'll be awakened. The last example I'll give is that, back in the early 1800s, the president of Yale University was opponent of vaccination, saying that if God had wanted to cure these diseases, God would not have created these diseases. And it led to a very kind of anti-scientific, debate with religion. I think we have the ability, and maybe it is high time for faith leaders like Pope Francis and others to say we're well beyond that kind of argument. And for the purposes of the well-being of our planet, and frankly for the integrity of our faith, let us learn from science and also know that we as religious people and religious leaders, we have a unique a unique contribution to make, but let's not contradict that which God's creation and God's wisdom has been implanted in scientists to determine.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Wonderful. I can simply mention that was the distinguishing characteristic of the meeting on April 28th, where we had the world's really top climate scientists together with religious leaders. Rabbi Rick, Jacobs, you were invited to come and you weren't able to be in that meeting, but that was exactly you've stated so well, the profound consensus that was in the room, and Dr. Jeffrey Sachs spoke to that in his opening remarks. Great, we have, okay, I see wonderful arrows being pointed.
Yeah,
Please, yeah. And
Thank
then,
you.
Okay, you with the mics just help in
I'd like to ask a question about individual responsibility. And the poorest people in the world cause the least amount of damage environmentally. And those of us that are, quote, successful cause the most amount. And I'm wondering how we consider our individual responsibility in terms of our carbon footprint. And this is something Thomas Merton spoke to. He could have been very famous and flown all over the world for all of his life. He chose to live a simple life. In fact, I think he only took one trip in 28 years. That was the one he died on. So the individual responsibility is what changes everything. We know that from the spiritual point of view. And I'd just like for you to address that and how you do that with your faith community.
Thank you very much. Panelists, individual responsibility, how is this addressed, each of us?
Well, of course, it is the expertise of religious leaders not to talk only to crowds, but also to reach to individuals and challenge people so that they can take decisions that is commensurate with their personal responsibility. One point I just want to add is the rabbi did say that we need to admit now that in terms of the pattern and the meaning and the pattern of development that we have in our world today, how can we ever convince ourselves that you are not happier because you have a bigger bank account? This is a question not only for you in the so-called rich countries, it's also the question we have to in our own poor nations. If we are able to get people to assess their well-being, not simply in terms of how much they have, but what quality of life they enjoy, that will already make it easier to vanquish those fears that you were talking about. And the problem I do have is that sometimes even we religious people do carry on as if prosperity is a sign of God's happiness and acceptance of you. And in my country, we are having a lot of that problem with the so-called prosperity gospel preachers. And when you have that, then it's very difficult to tell people to live a modest life, to live a simple life. It is as if God doesn't want you to be poor, which is true, but you have to understand it very well. Are we arriving in the world where those who have too much to eat and who are suffering from obesity, have we arrived at a time when we can convince them to consume less so that we'll make progress in this regard? This is where I believe we need time and effort.
Thank you. Rabbi Rick Jacobs, any comments?
I think individual responsibility is where the rubber meets the road. Obviously, we can make theoretical comments. The choices that we make and the things that we can forego, whether it's our carbon footprint, whether it's our responsibility. A couple of years ago, a wonderful leader of Hillel, which is our Jewish campus groups, was invited to speak at a congregation, in a university setting, and they put out a kosher meal. And to put out this kosher meal, They did so on paper plates with plastic forks and knives because it was easier to make sure that the food would be ritually fit if it were done in that way. And so my colleague said, actually this meal was not kosher. And the people said, oh, what do you mean? This was the most kosher meal you could find. We went to a kosher facility, and they sent all the food over wrapped very specially, and we put it out. What do you mean it's not kosher? He said, well, we're going to throw out all this waste. And what this meal needed was responsibility in every aspect, in its preparation, in the way in which we consumed it, and the way in which it will be afterwards. Here you have, a very old and a very deeply ingrained Jewish obligation about how we eat, but it doesn't mention in the ancient texts about plastic forks and silverware. It doesn't mention about the, responsible practices that we must add as, in a sense, a faith obligation, not just a choice that I'm going to make because, well, I want to do the right thing. I do want to do the right thing, but I want to feel that this is a religious obligation. So I can tell you not only a small circle, but a growing circle, the eating of kosher food is not only about the food, it's about how the workers who prepare the food are treated. Are they paid a human wage? Is the food, tainted with all kinds of, is it tainted with all kinds of preservatives that are harming our world? And is the actual consuming of it responsible and sustainable? So I think our traditions are elastic. They can grow, they can expand, and they can include. And I think that we can help people make those responsible choices through the traditions that we venerate, that we leave, and hopefully we're responsible enough to expand.
Well, you were getting applause. And Rabbi Rick Jacobs, in the Religions for Peace climate statement that you and His Eminence Cardinal John helped to develop in September, you will recall, and this was echoed in its own extraordinary way, somewhat differently, but in its own extraordinary way, by Cardinal Turkson's speech. There's something very resonant, and so I think what you were speaking to has a deep consensus. Our traditions have advanced virtues. Today, what are the climate-sensitive virtues or the sustainable development-sensitive virtues? What are our habits that are appropriate as religious people? And you've just outlined the way that heritage could become the base for a religiously constant but relevant development of those habits or virtues. So I think you speak for all of us, and we noted that, Father Michael, that was a central theme of Cardinal Turkson's own address on April 28th. So I think there is a terrific area that we have to build together. Time for just a couple more questions, please. Thank you very much. You were patient because I realized now you had requested the question, the mic earlier.
Thank you. What I'm worried about is going back a little bit, is the involvement of the youth. I can't see any movement like this succeeding without the energy of youth. It just has to be involved. And I look around in here today, and I don't see very many college students here. I'm old enough to remember when I was in college, the draft was in force. There was a great amount of discussion and discourse about the morality of war, and I don't hear that anymore. My question is, what do you think of reinstituting the draft to wake up the moral compass of those involved in waging war, which are always the youth of a country, and their parents? And when I served 5.5 years in the military, and I want you to know that we were involved at that time in the discussion of this. I think there are great moral problems today about drone warfare, about unilateral warfare, and I think once you awaken the moral compass of the youth, I think it'll spill over into the other things. Thank you.
a terrific question, yeah. Any comments?
Agreed.
I think there was agreement. Rabbi Rick Jacobs, do you want to make a comment?
The only comment I would make is that, first of all, I think the generation of parents and grandparents always worry about the young people and wonder if they're going to have the same moral backbone and will they be awake to the morality of the world around them. And, it's not something we ever should take for granted. And I spend a lot of my time with young people. I have to say that I am unbelievably inspired by their commitments, by their moral clarity. It was interesting, there was a study done just a couple of years ago by the nice people who create something called MTV, which probably many of us today don't spend any time looking at. But they were trying to figure out, what do young people want? What are they looking for? And they imagined that they would hear that they're looking to make a lot of money, find success, fame. What they found is that young people wanted most to live a life of purpose. They were searching for meaning. And I think we have to have a little bit more faith in our young people. And I would love the idea that we would, let them teach us. I spoke last week at UCLA, and I was really knocked over by not just the idealism, but the wisdom and the way in which they think about issues of climate change, of racial and social justice. So again, we worry about our young people. Believe me, I do as well. But I think we would do well to learn from our young people, let them have a voice, not in 30 or 40 years, but let them have a voice today in our faith communities and for these critical issues. I think we would be richer for it, and I think we would learn a lot, and we'd have a greater impact on these issues that we care so deeply about.